The Final Furlong Podcast is proudly brought to you by Geoff Banks Bet. Join the excitement and sign up to Geoff Banks Online now to get 10% off any net losses returned as cash after your first month of betting up to £500 at geoffbanks.bet. Welcome to the Final Furlong Podcast. I'm Members Kennedy. It is great to have your company on the show. On this episode, we're going to talk about a very deeply troubling trend in British racing, to a certain extent in British society, but certainly in the British racing community. And that is the alarming rate of suicides amongst people who work within the racing industry. In recent months, we've tragically lost 3 male jockeys to suicide. The pattern is not just heartbreaking, it's a call to action. Mental health problems affect 1 in 4 of us every single year, yet it remains stigmatized and often unaddressed. So to talk about this critical issue, we're joined by a special guest who is deeply connected to the racing world and highly qualified to speak on mental health. She's a former event rider and amateur jump jockey. Beyond her riding career, she holds a BSc and MSc in sport performance psychology. Her experience spans various sports, but her heart very much remains in equestrianism. And of course, she's a member of racing royalty. She's the daughter of Nicky Henderson. Camilla Henderson, you are very, very welcome to the Final Furlong Podcast.
Thank you for having me on.
You really came to my attention. We all know who Camilla Henderson is, but you spoke out after the tragic death of Michael Byrne on Twitter, highlighting what had happened and asking for something to be done to try and prevent this. And to be completely honest about it, you got a bit of blowback for that. There were some people who thought it was the wrong time to be highlighting that, thought it was wrong to be saying anything about it. And I completely disagree with that. There is no wrong time to talk about suicide. The worst decision that anybody can make. It's a permanent solution to a temporary problem. In your experience of working within the racing industry and being a psychologist, why do you think this is such an epidemic in racing?
I think it's hard for us, first and foremost, to say whether it is actually a problem per se in racing. But I think because we don't have all the stats, I know, Ireland, you sent me a really great article, have done probably more research than what the BHA have done, but we don't know the stats. We can't necessarily say there's a problem. But of course, we have had 3 suicides within the space of 4 years, directly related to a very specific group, which is male jockeys within the age of 30 to 40 that have come out of professionalism into their retirement. So it does feel like there's a natural theme there. But whether we can say what those direct correlations are, we can't until we do the specific research. But I do feel there are themes for sure around the decline of mental health for jockeys, because we see it the whole time. Jockeys are naturally just struggling a lot during their careers, and it seems to be very, very prevalent after. So that whole transition coming out of professionalism, whether that's because of a career-ending injury that's happened quite abruptly, or the decision to end their career because of consistent injuries over time, perhaps, or just age, that it's a very, very tough period in their lives. So I think naturally, most jockeys would say that's been a challenge for them mentally. But how many of those jockeys have ended up with a mental health disorder, we don't know. But yes, in the severe cases, that coping mechanism of not being able to cope has ended up in suicide, and that's very, very striking. So that's why I wanted to highlight the problem. Yeah, there was one person that said I picked the wrong time, and perhaps I did. I wasn't aware of, I think the funeral was a few days before my tweet, and I wasn't aware of that, so I apologize for the family members. But I know I have the support from Mikey's friends and the racing community. It's been really great support. And the fact that more people have come forward since my tweet has been really, really great, whether that be professionals that are working in the industry that want the same as me, or just other people that work in the industry that agree that saying more needs to be done. And of course, the people we're talking about, the stable lads and the jockeys, they're also the ones highlighting, we want to help, we want to get involved. So that's really, really great.
Trying to get to the bottom of this is almost impossible, to be honest. But to talk about it, I think, is really important, because most people are going to suffer some form of mental health issue, whether it's depression, anxiety, stress, feelings of being overwhelmed. That's just completely normal. But you could look at a sport like the NFL, where CTE has become such a massive talking point there, and there are players who have suffered massive mental health issues, and then it turns out afterwards that there's a reason for this. There were
physical traumas that those players had suffered, that had affected their cognitive abilities and led them into depression and a spiral of depression that then results in that awful thing. In the quest to try and understand this, if you go to your GP and you tell them you're depressed, you're probably going to be given an antidepressant, and that might be a good thing for you, but it also might not be a good thing for you.
It's the easy quick fix.
But it is more complicated than that.
Yeah, that's what's really frustrating, like just in my whole line of work. So at the moment, I'm just purely working with private clients at the moment, and quite a lot of them have already got a mental health diagnosis. Whether they've just gone to the GP or they've told a family member that they're really struggling, or they're already seeking therapy help, they're quite often on medication by the time they come to me, whether they're coming to me for just lifestyle help or for performance help. I get very frustrated by that, especially I'm speaking for the UK here in terms of the NHS help, that there are waiting lists of about 3 months upwards for talk therapy. So of course it's much easier to prescribe the drugs. So I do naturally have a lot of riders on drugs given by their GP, but they haven't even, before that, prior to that, they had not even considered talk therapy. Sometimes it's not even offered, or they know that they'd have to go private. And we all know to speak to a clinical psychologist could cost you up to £130 upwards an hour. It depends who you use, but if you're using someone qualified, quite often, it's hefty. So it is frustrating. And I always say to people, let's try and strip it back. If there is like a very heavy clinical diagnosis there, then I would always say, obviously, stay on the medication. And I'm not a psychiatrist, but I would like to work. If I was working with an athlete, ideally, you would work alongside the psychiatrist. So they're the ones medicating. But it's too easy for these GPs just to medicate some drugs for someone that's going through a really difficult, challenging time in their life, whether that be they've lost their job, career focus, injury, they've suffered broken bones, they've been in a car crash, bereavement, these things happen to all people in this world. And as you said earlier, every person on this planet will experience a bout of mental health decline at some point in their lives. That is very normal. But how many people are getting diagnosed? Not everybody. But it can become too easy if you kind of fit the requirements. So quite often, if you went to the GP and said, I'm not sleeping very well, I'm not eating well, I'm not finding the usual things that I'd find pleasure in, I'm not finding those things enjoyable anymore, I do struggle to motivate myself or to get up out of bed, and those changes of behaviors. And those things would be quite easy for anyone to tick, right? At some point in their lives, you've probably ticked all those boxes.
That applies to me, to be honest.
Yeah, you go to the GP and say that, you can get medication quite quickly. And actually, the change and the help that's needed is psychological therapy, whether that be cognitive behavioral, psychotherapy, acceptance and commitment therapy. There's lots of different therapies out there, but you need some help, a counselor, therapist, because that's actually going to help us change our mindset to try and change that behavior. The prescription is just a quick fix. So you're not fixing the problem. And the problem is the way that we are thinking. That is a mental health disorder. And yes, I understand that for some people, a lot of it is biological. Okay, so I know somebody, for example, with bipolar depression. It runs in their family. It's a very, very big mental health problem for that person, that individual. And the medication is important. Yes, I get that. I think to have the therapy alongside that is absolutely essential, and especially for people that have been through trauma and really, really difficult life experiences that have actually, affected them. We have to deal with trauma in a very serious way. And so techniques like progressive muscle, eye movement techniques and psychotherapy is really, really important. So the drugs can only do one thing. The rest of the work is thorough work with a therapist or a psychologist, and that's so important. And I think we undermine that, and especially with the clients that come to me, So I work with show jumpers and dressage riders, event riders, jockeys. A lot of my clients are equestrians, and they're already been prescribed drugs, and then they come to me, and it shouldn't be that way. So yeah, I get really frustrated by that.
Do you feel like this is not just a quick fix? It's trying to group everybody together as one. It's like, oh, if this medication works for one individual, then it's going to work for everybody. And we'll just give antidepressants to each and every person. And the truth of humanity is we're all individuals. We're all unique. We all experience life differently. We interpret things differently. We see the world differently. And so a medication that works for one person isn't necessarily going to work for somebody else.
Yeah. And I think some people think that it's just two very separate things. I was speaking to someone yesterday, like a golfer, and he said, oh yeah, I am on like a prescription, but I need someone to help me with my mindset, and I said, well, yeah, that's clinical. Like, it's a clinical diagnosis. If you're on medication for depression, you need to see a clinical psychologist. But he obviously felt, like they were very separate things, mindset separate, the prescription separate. So people need to understand that most of the time, let's say anxiety and depression, it has been derived from our mindset. It's not all the biological genetic makeup. It's based on our coping mechanisms, our perceived control, our perceived ability to cope. That notion of, can I cope in this situation right now? Okay, so say an individual believes they cannot cope and they don't have the tools because they haven't learned any yet. They will have that decline of mental resilience, mental toughness, coping mechanisms. And then, of course, all of those things will gradually sort of impair and implode on that individual, which can lead to severe anxiety or severe depression. So it's not necessarily because of a chemical imbalance in the brain. But as I said before, it can be very much a chemical imbalance, but most of the time it's not. It's just ineffective coping with difficult things in our life. And we can make that better with therapy, and we just need more. But in regards to the horse racing community, I think there needs to be education first in regards to psychology. A very well-known jockey in this country who's riding very well at the moment asked me once, what is a sports psychologist? He had no idea. Absolutely no idea. So we need to have that education around how can a sports psychologist help you when you're riding, and how might a therapist help you or a lifestyle coach help you. And it is a mind-boggling world, what the difference is between a psychologist, a psychiatrist, and a therapist. So I'm always happy to explain that.
Do you want to explain it now?
Yeah. I didn't know if I have already properly. Okay, so a psychiatrist is someone who can prescribe drugs. So they are technically a doctor, but they have a lot of qualifications in the sort of mental side of things. So a psychiatrist can also probably give you therapy as well. So the psychiatrist is almost like the top dog at the top of that pyramid. And then you've got psychologists. So you've got clinical psychologists that would look after people with clinical diagnoses such as depression, schizophrenia, addiction, etc. So that's clinical sort of mental health conditions. I am a sport psychologist, so all within the same governing bodies, but my specific area is more around the sport and the lifestyle within the sport and performance processes. So I'll talk about this later on around the sort of performance side, but things around leadership, communication skills, mental toughness, resilience, coping mechanisms, all around the sport and performance mindset. Can I work with people with mental health disorders? That's what people ask me quite a lot. If I felt you had a mental health disorder, I would refer you to a clinical psychologist. If I felt you were just having a low bout of poor mental health, which we all do at all different times of our lives, then I could work with you. But if I felt that there was like a diagnosis, if I felt you fit that requirement of generalized anxiety or depression, or I felt you did have an addiction that was taking over more than, just that I'm okay, but I need a bit of help, then I would refer. And I would try and encourage that client to refer themselves, obviously, if they're an adult. But if it's an adolescent, then obviously we would have the parents involved or the head coach involved or whatever if I'm working at a club. So you've got the psychiatrists, psychologists, and then you've got therapists. Okay, so therapists would be specific counsellors that work within specific approaches of psychology. Okay, so a psychologist has to know all the approaches. So in my work, I have to show case studies of using each approach. With counsellors and therapists, they can use specific approaches that are useful to them. So quite often you will see psychotherapists. Okay, so a psychotherapist will use the psychodynamic approach. Okay, you may have a cognitive behavioral counselor or a cognitive behavioral therapist who would just use the cognitive behavioral approach. And of course, sometimes athletes need to try a few therapists to get to the one that's most useful for them, and building rapport and relationship with a therapist is really important. I would just say to people, always check what their qualifications are, and that they haven't just gone and done a 6-week course somewhere, and that they are part of the right funding bodies and governing bodies. So more often than not, you need HCPC, which is the Healthcare Professional Council. And I'm more than happy to link those things if you can send them to your members, subscribers. But yeah, I hope that's helpful. But for jockeys, in terms of what is out there at the moment, in England, we have obviously the Inter-Jockeys Fund. So jockeys can call up the IJF and say, I would like some help, whether they're a current jockey or retired. And the IJF is connected to Sporting Minds, which is a sort of psychology company that provides services for all of what I've just mentioned. So psychiatrists, psychologists, and sports psychologists. So that's great that the support is offered there. However, the problem I have is it's kind of only there when you hit rock bottom, and then someone tells you about it, and then you might ring up and ask for it. But actually, when you're in those really, really difficult stages of your life, that's when you're really least likely to pick up the phone. Mm. But let's compare to a professional setting. Okay, so I've worked in rugby and cricket at the highest level in this country, and obviously the psychology is part of the program. So we will notice if that player is considerably not themselves on Tuesday morning. We can tell straight away, and there's always a lot of continuous check-in points. So they would have a lifestyle coach and a sports psychologist, and if there is a mental health diagnosis, they would have their own psychiatrist, and then myself, the sports psych, would speak with the lifestyle coach and the psychiatrist. So it's like a 3-way triangle, and we all get together and we check in for that individual probably every month. And then separately, as the coaching team, the head coach, then the bowling coach and batting coach, for example, the physio and the doctor and the sports psych, we would also meet every week to discuss each individual. So then if you think about the racing community with the jockeys, they don't have any of that. They have a physio, and that's about it. So how do we catch the mental health decline or someone struggling? We're not. That's the problem. And that's what really triggered me to kind of speak out, is to say we need a preventative approach, because it's not working. There's jockeys getting to rock bottom and then going, I need help. But some of them, first of all, might not see it, might not recognize it, might not want to admit it, especially if it's something like addiction. Huge, right? You're not going to tell anyone about that because you're not going to have a job, are you? If you admit you've got an alcohol problem or drunk problem. So, you know, there's a cycle of change, behavioral change, and contemplation and acceptance that we have a problem. It's actually, it takes quite a long time to get there. You know, get to that point of realizing I have a problem, and then the contemplation and then the actual realization of I would like that. That's a long process. So we're expecting the jockey to get to, do you know what I mean? To get to that process.
Yeah.
get to that moment where they're like, oh yeah, I need help. And so I feel a lot of jockeys perhaps go through their whole careers without accessing that help, because they don't want to show weakness, don't want to show vulnerability, don't want to lose their jobs. Maybe they're not sure of the help that's there. And then I guess after, once they've retired, they're just having to deal with a lot of stuff. And then obviously the retirement, the void. How do they deal with the void of not being a professional athlete anymore? So yeah, it's huge. And we can't say there's specific variables, okay? We can't say specific variables that are causing suicide. I think there's lots of variables. And in some of the jockeys' cases, you know, they're very individual cases. One of them did have a mental health diagnosis. I don't believe it was a full diagnosis, but he did have psychiatric help. Every individual is very unique, you know. It's very hard for us, do you know what I mean, to underpin a specific area that to go, right, this is what we need to fix. So I'm not bashing anyone at all. I just think we need more support and we need better systems.
This is a paid advertisement from BetterHelp Therapy Online. I want to take a moment to talk about something really important: mental health. This year has been flying by, and it's a great time to reflect on what we've accomplished and what we still want to achieve. For me, therapy has played a crucial role in my life, especially during my teenage years. Growing up with an abusive father and dealing with a traumatic childhood was incredibly tough. Therapy provided me with a safe space to work through my feelings, develop positive coping skills, and set healthy boundaries. It was invaluable to me then, and it's invaluable to me now. If you've ever thought about starting therapy, but you were put off by the prohibitive costs or the idea of pouring out your feelings in a stranger's office, I recommend giving BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, making it convenient and flexible to fit into your schedule. You just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a registered therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time at no additional charge. With over 1,000 therapists registered in the UK, BetterHelp can connect you with professionals who have a wide range of expertise in mental health. And our listeners get 10% off their first month at betterhelp.com/furlong. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/furlong. Take a moment for yourself and get on your way to being your best self with BetterHelp at betterhelp.com/furlong. This episode of the Final Furlong Podcast is only possible with your support, listening and watching, and with the support of our sponsors. So give me 60 seconds to tell you about Geoff Banks Bet. Betting on horse racing used to be very simple. It was us, the punter, versus them, the bookmakers, the old enemy. But today, betting with online bookmakers is zero fun. Online betting companies promise you the world, but if you have the nerve and the audacity to place a winning bet, they will make you jump through endless hoops just to access your cash. It is not fair and it's not fun. And betting is supposed to be fun. Geoff Banks is different. He's one of the most recognizable faces in British racing. He's got pitches at racecourses all across the United Kingdom. He is a true horse racing fan. And while Geoff very much promotes responsible betting, he is standing up and fighting back against these insane affordability checks. Affordability checks that will destroy the levy and kill British racing. Sign up to geoffbanks.bet right now. Use our promo code FFP500, and not only will you get access to a bookmaker who values your custom, who is a racing fan, but he'll give you best odds guaranteed on British and Irish racing, and he'll give you 10% cash back on net losses after your first month, up to £500. Gamble responsibly, 18 plus only, begambleaware.org. It's tradition refined with modern tech and unbeatable odds. Use our promo code FFP500 and place your bets now with Geoff Banks Bet.
The scary thing about it is, and I say this with the greatest respect to your profession, but we just don't understand the mind. If you look into the works of Sigmund Freud, of which most modern psychology is built on, and his partner, Jung, you'll have some psychologists who are very much of the opinion that Jung is very much the one you should be going on, and that his work is really what psychology should be built off of, more of a spiritual, as well as... He didn't want his manuscript published until 60 years after his death because he thought he would be completely discredited if it was to come out. And he does talk an awful lot about the spiritual as well as the mind. And we don't understand enough. We simply don't. And if you look into ADHD and OCD and all of these buzzwords that were put around various different psychological problems that people suffer from, they emerged in the wake of a massive scandal in the psychiatric industry in the United States in the 1970s. You can look up that for yourself. It's an Adam Curtis documentary. It features in that. I mentioned Adam Curtis to you yesterday. I know you were watching him last night. But essentially, we don't understand. We don't understand enough. But there are clearly intelligent, capable people like yourself who are not, I got the quick fix for you. Here's a pill, and it's going to save you. And I think we need more people like you. We also need more people to try to really get to the bottom of what's actually going on and to try and explain that, look, this is normal. I said this a couple of years ago on the show. I struggled with mental health since I was a kid. I had a terrible childhood, a brutal father. I don't think you ever really recover from that, to be completely honest about it. You can with good people around you and good support, but it leaves a scar on you, and you never really fully recover from that. And I could have 10 people tell me what a great show that was, and one person say, "You're crap," and it's the one person, it's that one negative comment that I'll hone in on, and it will get to me. That's the thing that could sink a day for me in its entirety, and ignore any of the nice things that were being said. That's clearly a failure of my mind, but it's also, I'm not alone in that. That happens to athletes who are on the biggest stage, footballers who are earning millions of pounds. No one is immune from this stuff. If you have the mental strength to completely ignore any criticism or any irrational hatred that is sent your way, I admire your strength, but most people are not like that. You mentioned the article from Lewis King earlier on. Lewis King is a PhD student at the WIT, the Waterford Institute of Technology. He conducted research that was funded by the Irish Racehorse Regulatory Board, the IHRB, and some of his research was published in various different medical health journals. This was for Irish racing, where the perception is everything's great in Ireland and racing is thriving here, hence the domination of British racing. He discovered through his research that 35% of Irish jockeys met the threshold for having depression, 27% suffered anxiety, 19% were suffering from psychological distress, and 61% were engaging in excessive consumption of alcohol and leaning on, almost bordering on a dependency, certainly an excessive intake.
Very high. That's a very high percentage. And I'm guessing we're talking about jockeys that are riding right now in that cross-sectional study. It's current jockeys, isn't it?
I presume so, yeah. I presume this is very much that Lewis was talking to jockeys who are actually riding today. But he didn't stop at jockeys. He went to trainers as well. He discovered 41% of them were suffering from depression, 38% engaging in adverse alcohol use, 26% had suffered psychological distress, 18% were suffering from anxiety. Only 20% of those he spoke to had actually accessed mental health support. Female trainers seeking more help more often than their male counterparts. Some of the issues that the male jockeys were facing was weight management, financial pressures, trolls on social media, and their barriers to help was feeling that if they were to seek help or tell people that trainers, as Siri decides to make a cameo appearance, that trainers would view them negatively. And you said this earlier on, that they're at risk of losing their job, basically, if they tell people that you're mentally vulnerable. Trainers worrying about how they would be perceived by their owners and by fellow trainers within the sport. And that
and the public,
it then becomes this thing that they feel trapped, that if they are to come out and say, look, I need help. Like the jockeys during the whip rules, the amount of jockeys I spoke to who said, I'm terrified to say something negative about the whip rules because I'm afraid that an owner or a trainer will go, oh, you can't adapt to them, I'm not going to use you anymore.
Or we don't like your opinion, so we don't want to be associated with you. Yeah.
And
that's how I felt before I come out to speak about this, because I was like, I know important people in racing are going to really not like the fact that I'm speaking out about the fact that we haven't got it right. I don't work in the industry. I used to. But yeah, I was worried, because people might not want to be associated with me because I'm ruffling feathers and I'm saying that things aren't good enough. And yeah, I guess it's the same. Everyone's always worried about what are the consequences of that. But I think also...
Just on that, Camilla, you're Camilla Henderson. You're Nicky Henderson's daughter. And you were afraid to talk out about this because ruffling the feathers of the establishment and pointing out that, hey, we don't have this linked.
I want to help the industry. So I want to work for the industry. I want to help. Okay. So in whatever way, whether that's for NARS, or NTF, for IJF, PJA, of course I want to help. I want to help the industry. I want to help really the higher powers above that have all the powers, the BHA, right? So I want to help. So I did feel I had to be slightly careful not to, piss a few people off, because they're not going to want to work with me if I piss them off saying what you're doing isn't working. So, on Nick Luck, I said to them, I don't want to just moan, because everyone's doing what they can.
Yeah.
Perhaps they don't have the right resources. Okay. Some of them have a lot of money. The IJF has a lot of money. And I'm not slating what they're doing. They're doing amazing things. Of course they are. They're doing amazing things. They've just taken all the, ex-spinal injury retired jockeys, all the beneficiaries of the IJF. They've all just had an amazing holiday last week in Spain. It's amazing. But what I'm saying was very much acute to this problem with mental health decline, suicide, because it all hits us really personally.
Yeah.
And that's where I was like, no, we need to do more. We need to do more. But yes, I was worried about how that's going to be received, because they might see it as, she's criticizing us. We are doing all of this. Since James Banks died, they have put in more structures in place, which is great. So they've put in Sporting Chance, Sporting Minds, 2 big organizations. So you could ring up one of the rehab houses and say, I'd like some help. It will be found for you. Only a small amount is covered. It's not all covered. I know jockeys that have had their sessions, and then it's up to them if they pay. If they want to carry on, obviously they have to pay. But I do know there are jockeys that have been retired and they have rung up, or their friend has rung up on their behalf because they're not ready themselves, to say they need help. They literally need rehab help, as in, critical drug problems. And sadly, they have been passed away. Please call up your GP. And for me, that was what was frustrating. And that's why I said, I'm happy to put my head out on the parapet to say it's not good enough. And people have sent me their referral emails from certain organizations within the horse racing saying, please seek referral with your GP. Sadly, we can't help you at the time and point. But actually, the advert from organizations such as the IJF say, however many rides you've had, we will support you. But they clearly can't do that. They clearly don't have the capacity, but that's what they have been saying. And when people come to me with all this information, there's nothing I can do with it. Nothing I can do. So I just want to highlight how we can do things better. But I don't want to upset people, because they have all the right intentions. Do you know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Don't judge people by what they say. Judge them by what they do. So you can tell us that you're deeply concerned about mental health issues within the racing industry. You're concerned about stable staff. You're concerned about jockeys. You're concerned about trainers. And you're going to put on all of this stuff to try and help them out. What is there? And what are you doing to make their lives easier? Because Sunday evening racing wasn't going to make the lives of stable staff and jockeys easier. It was going to make it harder. And that was an insane decision to come about with in the first place, especially given what they had to apologize for back in January. Like the CEO of the British Horse Racing Authority having to say, I'm sorry for failure to act, to intervene and to help and support stable staff who felt they'd been bullied, stable staff who'd been sexually assaulted, stable staff who'd been harassed. A major mishandling of that. The sauna ban that was introduced may very well be introduced by Dr. Jerry Hill under the guise of this is for the benefit of jockeys' physical well-being. But this is something he's been talking about since 2017. And the reality is that it was less than 50% of the jockeys who ride in the United Kingdom who actually voted to give up the sauna ban. The COVID weight allowance was part of that, so they thought they were going to have that always. That goes away. PJA, Professional Jockeys Association, get the largest response in the history of their organization to a survey, where over 80% of the jockeys said they are now physically and mentally worse off than when saunas were available in British racecourses. And the response from everybody in British racing is, oh, well, tough. The only one who's actually done something about that is the Jockey Club, who are providing vouchers for jockeys to be able to go and access saunas at hotels that they're involved with or leisure centres that they've got contracts with or that they own outright. Yeah. So they're recognising, look, this is crazy. We have to do something to help these jockeys, and they need to be able to lose weight in a medically controlled environment that is beneficial to them. We've spoken to jockeys on this show who are driving to the race course, sometimes a 4-hour drive, with the heating on full blast in their car, their heated seats on. They're making themselves a danger to themselves and others, but it's an act of desperation because they...
Yeah, and that's highly dangerous.
Exactly. So what exactly are you doing to make life better for jockeys and for stable staff? Because I don't see a whole lot of measurements being put in place.
I think when they put that in place, the changes, and I only remember this from when I was working previously within the industries, I think they obviously felt that, jockeys could make that marginal change with their weight permanently to say, which some jockeys maybe could have, which is saying, can we lose that 2 pounds of fat more permanently, where you're then not yo-yoing that amount every time you get to the race course? But only for a very small percentage of jockeys perhaps were doing that, where they weren't quite at their leanest, let's say, where they were then doing quite a lot of sweating. Okay, so some jockeys on their worst, I'm talking more about jump jockeys. I guess flat jockeys can't do this. Flat jockeys have to be lean. But let's say a jump jockey who was going really up and down, and then they would lose sort of 6 pounds, some of them, or more, within 24 hours. And I think the BHA perhaps were thinking around, can we just try and change that system where jockeys are, getting rid of the fat more on a sort of permanent basis? And they're sort of saying, the sauna should only be used for that little tweak. And I think they were worried about the sauna use in terms of what was going on there. I do massively disagree with it, because I still work with jockeys that are then actually having to drive somewhere else first after they've ridden out somewhere else to get in the sauna, or go to their friend's house that has a sauna, then go to the race course. Like, they're still doing it, so you can't stop it. And some jockeys will naturally, as lean as they are and as lean as they can get themselves, they will still need to sit in the sauna and sometimes just get rid of 1 pound or 2 pounds. And now they're just actually needing more time, whether that's to run around the track in a sweatsuit or go and use a sauna somewhere else. It's actually making their lives harder. And I think they didn't realize that. They were just thinking, jockeys can just lose more fat, and it needs to be like a healthier way of doing things and a healthier way of getting rid of weight. But everyone knows when you're doing such low weights that sweating is necessary. Even for the leanest of the jockeys, they will still need it every now and then. They don't want to always be turning up in docks. So yeah, it's a whole topic, isn't it? It's the same as the online abuse. It's a whole topic. It's definitely a contributor to decline of mental health. So how are we helping jockeys make their lives easy? I don't want to say easier, because it's not easy, but more comfortable and less gritty. Is we need to sort out these things. There should be less racing.
How about you do something that doesn't make their life harder?
Exactly. And I don't think it was thought through, but they're just doing it because it's healthier. Saunas is really old school, and they shouldn't.
The perception is it's healthier. The perception is, and they lent on a study that is not from a college, with the greatest respect to that college. It's not a college that any other sport would lean on and go, oh, well, this college has done incredible research and we can lean. With the greatest respect to that college, they're not one of the leading colleges in the United Kingdom, and they're not one that... There's actually scientific studies that come from other colleges that would strongly disagree with what they've said, but it just conforms to a narrative, and the narrative was saunas are bad, therefore we want to ban them, with no real key understanding of the adverse effect it would have on jockeys. And I'm sorry, but that's a major problem. Yeah. It's a common theme we keep seeing. There is a total lack of understanding of what is to the benefit of a jockey, what is to the benefit of a stable staff. The people who make these decisions just seem like they're completely disconnected from reality and totally out of touch with what jockeys and stable staff really need.
Yeah. Excuse my ignorance. What's the situation in Ireland with saunas? Did
banned here as well? No.
Banned as well. Okay, because I didn't know.
And I don't have the research that the PGA have, but I know that the Irish jockeys I've spoken to very unhappy.
Yeah. Do you ever think this could be turned around, given all of your knowledge within the industry?
Oh, that's a very difficult question. Look, the saunas are not going to fix every little issue, but it would be something to help jockeys. And I would rather that they have access to saunas where there's a medical team on track at the race course, that if, God forbid, anything bad was to happen, they can be helped, as opposed to...
In the car.
as opposed to exactly having the heating on full blast in the vehicle.
At the end of the day, the big problem is the fact that the weights are so low for the flat jockeys, is that is the way it is, and jockeys are still going to have to do some crazy things to make those weights. And as much as they are disciplined throughout their week, you know, I was speaking to a jockey last week and he said, I'm really annoyed, didn't really eat much food at the weekend, but I'm a pound over and oh God, I need another 45 minutes to get rid of this. And I hadn't planned for that in my day. And it's really stressing me out and really, really stressed out about it. 1 pound. And he was really disciplined over the weekend and you know, making detours to go to a David Lloyd. It's just you can't get your head around it. It does require a lot of extra planning as well. And I think,
Camilla, I don't often ask jockeys what their diet is or what they eat, but I did happen to, there's a number of them I have. The typical response you get is, oh, well, I have a banana for breakfast and then I have a cup of tea at lunch. That's it. How?
They shouldn't be drinking cups of tea. They shouldn't be drinking any caffeine because that you have caffeine, it will dehydrate you and you will hold on to water.
It's a diuretic,
Education, you know. Coffee and chocolate is probably their go-to diet for a lot of them.
How do they have the energy to concentrate, never mind be physically riding a racehorse to the best of their capabilities when you're starving yourself like that? It's crazy.
Richard Hughes, I remember, said, if I can only eat one food, I may as well just eat chocolate. So he was famous for having a diet of chocolate in the weighing room. And I remember, because I know his wife, and she showed me his sweetie drawer, and it was just all chocolate, and that's pretty much all he ate.
Who was that?
So bad, isn't it?
Oh, good man, Richard. That was the way to do it. But yeah, not exactly the healthiest of diets, but somehow he was thin as a stick as well.
Yeah, there's, you know, you've got nutritionists now based at the different IJF houses, but let's say there's a workshop on. Are jockeys going to those workshops? Nope. They can have a nutritionist if they want one. There's only a few slots there on a Tuesday. Great.
Well, that's one of the things. That's one of the things I wanted to bring up to you as well before we wrap up. I mean, look, we could talk about this for hours, and the truth is, we're still not going to get to the bottom of it. But Trish sent me research from the UK. Do you know what the leading cause of death amongst young men in England and Wales was in 2022?
Suicide.
Yeah.
5,583 people in England and Wales, not Northern Ireland, not Scotland, killed themselves in 2022. So it's not just racing. Obviously, racing has a serious issue. That research from
it's huge. Yeah, it's
from that young
dominant killer of males 30 to 40. And you'd think it would be like car accidents, wouldn't you? Or I don't know,
cancer, heart disease.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, it's a wide country problem, for wide world problem. But is it more prevalent in sport? I think it is. There's an abundance, so there's not enough research within our sport, other than obviously the research you've mentioned. Racing Welfare did some research about 5 years ago, but it was more around what are the stresses, what are the variables that are causing you sort of mental health decline. Didn't look specifically into mental health disorders. It was just, they were just basically trying to look at what are the stresses for jockeys, what are the stresses for stable staff, what are the stresses for people that work within race courses, farriers, you know, all of that. But didn't actually give us stats on, you know, depression, anxiety, addiction, you know, jockeys coming out of retirement. It was just sort of, what are the triggers, you know, what are the difficult things? So one of them would be jockeys having to, you know, waste their weight, or feedback from trainers, you know, relationship problems. So we haven't got enough research. So that's what we do need. But there has been an abundance of research in general in the UK and in the US around elite athletes and mental health disorders, particularly within the period of coming out of professionalism, going into retirement. So that transitional period, there's so much research that shows there is an increase quite often with mental health decline with retirement, basically in elite athletes. Okay, so this is people doing it for their jobs. So Can we draw from other sports and learning from other sports? Yes. And I'm pretty adamant that jockeys are more susceptible. Not the research, but I'm pretty adamant there is, based on the other findings from other sports. So there's plenty we can draw from cricket, football, rugby in this country.
I would expand that just a little bit in that there is an old saying, the biggest killer is retirement, or retirement is the biggest killer. That if you have a job, you have a purpose, you have a get up and go about, if you're very good at that, and then you get to a point in your life where, here's your golden watch, thanks for your years of service, now, off you go, here's a farewell party. And then that person just feels lost. And if you can go into something else that gives you purpose, maybe some people can just really enjoy their retirement and have 40 years in the sun or whatever it is they choose to do. But some people just...
and be like, great,
It's again, this comes down to this... it comes down to the individual, doesn't it?
Yeah. Massively. Personality, how much your identity was made up of being a jockey, or how much your identity was of being a CEO of this company. And for some jockeys, as you say, cope well, they might already had a job lined up. For example, Jamie Moore recently, national hunt jockey, he's going to go straight back into the family business, and he's involved, and perhaps he's got that purpose there. But some jockeys are suddenly like, oh my goodness, I'm unemployed as soon as they actually hand their license back, and there is no sort of like, there's no thread through their career which helps them go, what are you going to do? And that's what other sports do really well. So I'm working with youth academy footballers. They're 16, 17, 18 years old. They might not even get a contract once they're 18 years old, and then they're just thrown out. Or they get a contract, they're a pro for like a couple of years, then they're released. But that sounds brutal. It happens because very, very small amount of footballers make it to professional contracts beyond the age of 18. But what the FA have is a massive pathways in place. So that 17-year-old, so they've left school, that 17-year-old footballer has to do an MVQ level within their club. So we would do a sports psych module. It'd be a professional sport MVQ. So they'd have modules in psychology, modules in physio, and like strength and conditioning and communication and stuff. And so at least they would walk away with a qualification. But jockeys don't have any of that. We don't have any pathways. We don't have any support systems. It's literally like you hit rock bottom, you might be able to ring up a free phone line. So that's what I would really like to see, particularly to call on the BHA to put, to make these requirements in our sport like it is in every other sport. Every football club has a requirement to ensure they're like almost like their apprentices, which would be their like senior academy guys, do come away with some qualifications, because they have all left school, obviously, because they're like, I want to be a footballer. Like the jockeys, a lot of them are left school at 16, and that's crazy. Why aren't they encouraged to go and get A levels? Why aren't they encouraged to go and get a diploma or a qualification on the side? They're not. A lot of them will say, well, we're not academic anyway, we can't do it. But they could go and do an apprenticeship alongside their apprenticeship being a jockey in a certain yard. So there's not that much support from the trainers for their apprenticeship. Some trainers are great. They have the responsibility, those trainers, to watch through the videos, the replays back with that jockey. But that's kind of all they have. If they have a jockey coach and they use one, great. But again, limited hours with a jockey coach. I think they get a few sessions a month, and then your time's up at a certain point. And so I think, we could definitely provide more thorough support to those conditionals and apprentices going through like those initial stages of their careers, for sure. Because we know a lot of them don't make it, right? A lot of them don't make it into professionalism, or they lose their claim. Trainers don't necessarily want to use them. Then where's the support? There isn't any at that point in time. So I think that's a really important phase, a period of time where jockeys need to have more support. So we need to have pathways, programs. It needs to be compulsory. That's what I'm saying.
No, I agree. I 100% agree. I know that time is against you, but and I really appreciate your insight and your time on this show. There are two things I wanted to talk to you about very, very briefly before you go, though. We mentioned there's 61% of jockeys in Ireland who are having at least an excessive alcohol intake. There's sometimes there's a stigma involved with people who are, it can just be dismissed as, oh, he's fond of the drink, or he's a little bit too fond of that. We know that there's a problem with drug abuse in racing. We know that there's a problem with alcohol abuse in racing. Almost always, it's not because someone is loving the taste of alcohol. You are leaning on that as a crutch, as a dependency to cope with something. You are running from something.
Coping mechanism for a problem. Yeah. You're masking a problem by drinking. Yeah.
That's exactly the phrase. You are masking, you're masking the symptoms of an issue, but you're not doing that for any reason other than you are trying to escape something. So the only way that's going to be
being anxious and sweating is a coping response. Like your heart beating, it's an alert system for our bodies because of it's protecting us from a fear, right? So with the alcohol, it's what are we not happy with that's leading you away? You know, your body is trying to move you away from the fear of what's wrong. So the worry about, you know, stresses at work, you know, bad relationship with your boss, the trainer, those kind of things. And these things building up. But what happens is we suppress and suppress and suppress. And then we find something that's like an easy deference, right, from the problem. And it basically is called like experiential avoidance. We're actually avoiding the problem. And the drink just becomes that thing that helps us avoid that problem even more. And the drugs even more so. Such a quick thing, isn't it? To try and get away from the problem. But I don't think people even understand that concept. Do you know what I mean? And as you say, it's just like a social thing. Like, oh, that person just loves their drink and loves a night out. But when we become dependent on it, or that jockey needs to drink every evening, or may not even be every evening, just a proper blowout every weekend, it's still a problem.
Yeah.
If they're using it as a mechanism for something that they're deeply not happy with, and sometimes a lot of that is unconscious. So that's where a psychologist can help them.
That's where I'm fascinated by Carl Jung's interpretation of psychology, because you could say that the reason that you're drinking so heavily, or the reason that you're taking Valium to sleep at night, is because your subconscious doesn't want you. It's not letting you sleep, but it's trying to tell you something. It's trying to make you confront something, or it's trying to make you see something that you don't want to see. So you lean for a petrochemical drug.
And then you keep having those layers of protective mechanisms, which is the drink, the alcohol, the running away, the overeating. You know, it could be anything.
Yeah.
You know, sexual indulgence.
And again, we don't fully understand the mind yet, but the subconscious is a very powerful thing. Your dreams are a powerful thing, and you can't really experience dreams if you're on petrochemicals like Valium. The other thing I wanted to ask you about is antidepressants. We talked about at the very start of the show that it's just handed out to you as this pill that will save you. I think very clearly from talking to yourself, but from my own experience as well, really the best treatment is therapy. And if you can get professional therapy, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
But
I'm not ever taking anything away from prescription medication, because it really generally does help someone. So if someone's really suffering from, let's say, acute schizophrenia or psychoticism, you know, drugs are massively helpful and really needed sometimes in those real acute like moments. But of course, I generally believe with depression, anxiety, if we're not experiencing a really, really like heavy bout of it, definitely therapy first. Always therapy first.
And even if you're reluctant to go and seek out help from someone like yourself or from a therapist, even just to talk to someone you know that you trust, that will listen to you, and that won't just say, hey, did you see the football last night? Oh, Arsenal really blew it. No, actually have a proper conversation about how you're feeling. And if you can make that first step, then you can go into therapy. But you need to make that step. Talking is something that will very much help.
Or if you don't feel comfortable speaking to a friend or a family member, just know that the support is there and it can be completely confidential. You know, so I have plenty of riders on my books who really didn't want to tell their parents or their friends or their trainer, and that's fine, that's up to them. I always encourage them to. Sports psychology there's less personal stuff involved, but you know, quite often I'm dealing with people with, you know, PTSD and things, and sometimes then layered on top of that personal areas that they're struggling with. But I would always encourage people to share that information, because others can help, and talking about your problems and things that you struggle with, that really, really helps. It can become, when we have those conversations, it helps you understand your mind. So psychology is all about understanding ourselves and understanding our functional and dysfunctional ways of thinking. And if we are not aware of the dysfunctional thinking, then we will continue to behave through those dysfunctional behaviors, which is ineffective coping. So yeah, I could go on and on and on. But yeah,
if I had
so important.
If I had the power to make you become the czar of mental health in Great British Racing, what would be the first thing you would do to try to help stable staff, jockeys and trainers?
I would restructure the whole thing and put compulsory programs in place. So trainers, we've got to have mental health officers in the yard. We've got to have mental health advisors coming in. Education, so like workshops in the yards around mental health, sports psychology, how to deal with your finances, someone coming in and talking to them about their addiction journey and how they've come out the other side. So lots of educational workshops, more contact points throughout the yard, so like group work. With the jockeys, again, educational workshops. They have to see a sports psych every week. They have to check in, assessments, clinical assessments that are done throughout their careers, and then pathways that are put through from apprentices upwards. So that support is threaded through their career, whether they have finished their career very early or all the way through, and better structured rehab programs for when jockeys retire out of professionalism into retirement. So stronger programs there. And we need lifestyle coaching, sports psychologists and clinical. We need all of it.
We need
of course, this needs lots of money. Yes, lots of money. But I think education, that's the most important one first, because the education then dives into the sort of preventative system.
I'm sure there are people going, the levy talks collapsed. Where's the money going to come from this? We're literally talking about life and death. You can't put a number on this. Yeah. And you can't not justify helping. I don't have all the answers. Camilla's far smarter than me. She sounds like she has a lot of the answers. Maybe she's wrong. We'd love to hear from you. But something has to be done. Just for society at large. For society at large, not just for racing, but society at large. Yeah, I greatly appreciate your help today. I greatly appreciate your insight, Camilla. And I think that what you're doing...
Thanks for having me on. It's been good to just chat about it. And hopefully we'll just engage and get more people to just think a bit more deeply around, what are they doing for their own mental health? I haven't even spoken about that. But it's all our responsibilities as well to look after our own mental health. And I think we all forget that. So if anyone can take anything away from this is put you first. I always say that to my clients, is put your mental health first, and you're all worth it.
Well said. Life is precious. You only get one go at it. Camilla, thank you so much for your insight, and thank you so much for your time on the show today. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Final Furlong Podcast. If you did, a like and subscribe on YouTube is much appreciated from Camilla and me. We'll talk to you again very, very soon. Look after yourself and each other. God bless.
The Final Furlong Podcast is proudly brought to you by Geoff Banks Bet. Join the excitement and sign up to Geoff Banks Online now to get 10% off any net losses returned as cash after your first month of betting up to £500 at geoffbanks.bet.